Hello and welcome to episode 155 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. Today's show is going to get a little controversial, so hit the YouTube comments section respectfully, of course, if you want to make your opinions heard. My good friend Maz is here for her first time in 2024. We're going to talk about Disney and the company's perception issues. What we mean by that exactly will become clearer throughout the conversation. Yes, I mentioned the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. We're still growing the channel and still getting good numbers on podcast episodes. This year, I would love to get more views and positive comments on the videos. Do us a favor and make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Whenever you listen or watch something, drop a like and a comment. The goals we are looking to accomplish are only possible with eyes on our content. Right now, you can see new vlogs from Epcot's International Festival of the Arts, and I'll be bringing you a ton of stuff leading into July when we will introduce new features and shows to the channel. Take the time right now to subscribe. Now let's welcome back to the podcast, Maz. Thanks for being here, Maz.
Thank you for having me back.
So people are going to hear the new name and just deal with it. You know what? You know who she is, but we are trying something a little different and we don't have to address it. So you've done it with Puff Daddy already, and now we're doing it with Maz. So let's get into our topic today, and this is going to be broad, so we might bring in a whole bunch of different topics in this conversation, and we are going to talk about Disney's perception issues. And Disney is obviously, we spend all of this time talking about Disney, we spend all of this time going to Disney. We absolutely love it. It's a great place. All of the parks are amazing. Most of the content that they make is amazing, or if we don't find it amazing, it's not necessarily for us. But there is a perception issue that I think we have to address because it is having an impact now, I think, on the parks and people's enjoyment of the parks. But it is a very, very broad topic. I think the best place to start is the change from Splash Mountain, which later this year at Walt Disney World is going to turn into Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Now, this was a change that they have been talking about now for almost 4 years. They announced it during the closure in 2020. And they have just not been able to kick this story. And it's not about them getting involved in the culture wars, because I don't think Disney was getting involved in the culture wars. I think they had an intellectual property that was problematic on a ride that was breaking down all the time, and half of the animatronics didn't work. So they were going to have to do a big time renovation on this ride anyway, and they decided to retheme it, and they have just gotten caught in something that it doesn't seem like it's ever going to die. So why don't we talk about not necessarily the change itself, but how Disney handled the change?
Yeah, oh boy, there's so much to talk about because it seems like for a while, it seemed like Disney was determined to consistently do the wrong thing in terms of PR. And it was wild because even like as an outsider, and I'm not someone who is like a PR expert or anything like that, but you see people having these responses to this ride, and it feels like it almost should have been like Disney should have almost just been like, this is it, we're changing the ride, done. But it kept getting dredged up in different ways, and it kept kind of spinning like almost out of its own control. And so then Disney felt like they had to address things on and on and on. And it just riled people up more and more and more. And it just became this like cycle.
I think you make a really good point there by saying they created this cycle because, as I just mentioned, they announced that the ride was going to be rethemed during the closure for the pandemic, but they never really said it's going to be done at this time. Like, if you remember when they first reopened Magic Kingdom, there were people who didn't know how long was going to be around. So during the annual pass holder previews, when they reopened to just a couple thousand people, the first wave of people rushed back to the gift shop at Splash Mountain and bought a whole bunch of merch and then took it to their cars before coming back in for the rest of the day. So they announced it while the parks were closed, then reopened the ride with the parks. So that was another time that we had the conversation. Then they make the announcement of when the ride is going to close instead of just closing the ride. And then that made for a big experience. And each and every step along the way, in an issue that has sort of become a part of the culture wars in some way, they have reignited it just by the scheduling of how they did this.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think part of it was out of their control. Like, I think when they first announced it, they didn't know what the timetable was going to look like for renovation because they didn't know what the timetable was going to look like for opening the parks or how much revenue they were going to use, what kind of projects would have to be shelved. And it's almost like in that case, why didn't you just wait and say, we have, like they always do, we have these blue sky projects coming and we're going to do something, there will be construction in Magic Kingdom, blah, blah, blah. And then once you have a firmer timetable and you know that you can go ahead with this renovation, then you have the license to say, hey, Splash Mountain's last day will be, September 21st, and it will be renovated into this, and it will open in 2024.
So do you think that they felt any pressure to make this announcement during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020? Or do you feel that they felt the pressure to make this announcement because the parks were closed and they were trying to keep excitement going for the parks? Or is it a combination of both that did sort of backtrack on them a little?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think that, they felt that pressure to say, hey, this IP is problematic and we're not going to have it in our parks anymore. And then also to say, hey, don't worry, I know we're closed, but we still have cool things happening and cool things coming down the line. And they figured they could just roll it all up into one announcement, which obviously has had many repercussions.
I'm not a big fan of drops. So I had only ever done Splash Mountain once. I was like, oh, I'll deal with the drop and I'll see this ride so I can at least experience it and have that knowledge base. This was something that you did a little more often. How important was this ride to a Disney vacation for you? And do you think that there is a segment of the Backlash? I know that the Backlash has become so cartoonish to the point that I don't think it's easy to think of the people who do just miss this ride as having a valid point, because so many people who are just wackadoodles have taken on the cause of trying to keep Splash Mountain Splash Mountain.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously going to be the loud, annoying group of people, but there's also a group of people who, they grew up going to Disney World with their parents, and this was always a part of their vacation. And now they're bringing their kids, and it's a part of their vacation with their children. And so they viewed it as part of that tradition of going to the parks, and they're sad about losing that. I think that's valid. I understand being upset that a tradition that you enjoyed is going away. For me personally, I wrote it every now and then, particularly if it was very hot out, because otherwise I'm not a huge fan of like getting my socks wet and then walking around in a theme park all day. So, it wasn't as crucial to my vacations. But I try to think about if Big Thunder Mountain was getting totally changed. And it's like, yeah, I'd be a little sad to lose the ride that I grew up going on and that I do every time I visit the parks. But I do really think there's something to be said for the fact that the track is staying the same. So you're still getting the log flume ride with the big drop at the end. And that's really the cornerstone of the ride. If they said they're changing Big Thunder to Muppets tomorrow, but the track was staying the exact same, it'd be like, all right, cool. I still get to have fun on the ride.
Oh, come on. Like, what a horrible example. If they changed Big Thunder to Muppets, that would be the most amazing thing ever, and it would be amazing. If they
That's true.
changed it to be themed to the Pacific Northwest instead of being themed to the Southwest, I do think maybe I would be like, oh man, I really love the Southwest theming, but I would still love all the things that I still love about that ride. So I think that was a good point to make. I also think that we're getting a lot of princesses moving into different places. So Princess Tiana getting her own ride, just like Anna and Elsa replaced Maelstrom with Frozen over in Epcot. You didn't hear quite as much of a stir about that one because nobody was able to attach that to the culture wars. So pretty much we have some people who are like, oh darn, I miss Maelstrom, but they're not causing the stink about it online. Even the jokes about Mr. Toad's Wild Ride when they had those protesters who were just doing it because it was fun. Like, they were having fun protesting the change. Disney was in on the protests. But as we talk about this, it is that perception issue. I feel like there are people who think Disney is getting involved in politics or getting involved in the culture wars, where I don't think that's the case. I think Disney is trying to stay out of the culture wars, is trying to stay out of politics to the point that by the time they do anything, it is perceived as being this big major move because they stayed out of it and tried to be quiet for so long. Another prime example of that, probably the biggest example, is the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, where it wasn't that Disney eventually came down on one side or the other. It was that Disney went so long without saying anything about it when it was a bill that was affecting their cast members. It wasn't until cast members started walking out on the job, Josh D'Amaro had to release a video to the cast members saying, we're with you, but they wouldn't make a statement publicly saying that they were with the cast members. So if they had just come out immediately with a statement, I think it would have just been washed up with everything else that was being talked about at the time, and it never would have been as big. But trying to ride the fence for so long is something that they are messing up on time after time after time.
Yeah, it is. And, it's also Disney is this huge company, right? Culturally, economically, like they are this huge business. No matter what they do, they're going to have eyes on them. No matter what their statement is, it's going to be more public and more visible than other companies will be because they're Disney. They're this conglomerate. So if they're already going to have that level of increased attention on them, just make the statement to begin with. Don't try to tiptoe around it and then be like, oh, we don't want to draw that much attention to ourselves. We don't want to make a public statement. Well, eventually you're going to get forced into it and it's going to get a swarm of media attention. So just stand behind something to begin with. You're still going to get the same amount of media attention, except maybe you'll keep your cast members a little happier about it.
And Disney wouldn't have gotten as much press attention if it wasn't for the cast members having to walk out on a particular day from work to try to make this statement. It was a statement that would have been already made. It would have been a 5-second mention on the news. But then when the cast members come out, and now all of a sudden that's getting the attention, and then people on a certain side of the issue feel like Disney is catering to their employees, as if that's a bad thing, I guess, in some people's eyes, then it sort of takes on this life of its own, where if they had just released the statement at the beginning, everybody would have been happy. Last June, I had Alicia Stella from Orlando Park Stop on the show. She was doing a fundraiser for the Trevor Project, and I sort of brought up to her how Universal does such a better job of towing the line of not making all sides upset. They are dealing with this powder keg that is J.K. Rowling, like their most successful entity by far. The reason that I would say, I'm going to venture and say the majority of people who go to the Universal parks go because of Harry Potter and that IP. And they have to deal with her doing something ridiculous every 2-3 months, but they somehow find a way to distance themselves from J.K. Rowling while embracing the intellectual property that they are paying her to use without ending up in these same problems as Disney. And I hope someday whoever is in charge of that at Universal teaches some sort of master class so I could see how they did this. But it is just incredible. And I want your opinion on, first of all, how Universal does that, but how should Disney take a page from what Universal does to avoid this type of criticism?
I think this goes back to Disney's perception issue. I think it's all tied together because Disney has this perception as this family company and this brand for children. Universal doesn't have that at all. So whenever Disney does something that certain people perceive as controversial, it's always, what about the kids? Oh my God, you're corrupting the youth and things like that. And Universal doesn't have that standard. Universal can make missteps. Universal can have Horror Night merch and Horror Night props go up in the park during the daylight hours. And no one cares about the fact that it might scare their 7-year-old. It's just not something that's ever talked about because people don't see Universal as a company that has to guide their children morally throughout their lives. And for some reason, they're both entertainment companies. I'm not saying you should ever look to an entertainment company to be the moral standpoint of raising your children, but people do for Disney. People look at Disney and expect it to be the one that's going to teach their kid life lessons and help them grow up to, do this or that or be this kind of person. And people are like, yeah, Universal's fun. They got rides. They got cool themes. It's like, yeah, yes, that's what they are. They're theme parks.
So one of the funniest things just happened on a side note where we stopped recording because Mass's father was talking on his cell phone loudly. And you asked if I could hear it because I could hear the last time the train went past. And I'm like, no, I think we can start recording again. And then immediately when we started recording, boom, there's the train. Anyway, if you heard the train, there's some nice fun sound effects for you. It's the Hogwarts Express. Just envision that.
Ambiance.
I think that's a really good point that you make because Disney has been around for so long, for example. Not that Universal hasn't, but we have these intellectual properties like Snow White, and there's the Princess movie that has carried since Snow White and into the modern day. So as you continue to make the Princess movie in the Princess formula, you will start to see more modern ideas creeping into it, just like 1937 modern ideas were in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when they made that. I guarantee you, if they would have tried to make that movie just 10 years later, it wouldn't have taken place in Germany. So everything is a product of its time. And as you see the progression in the Princess movie or the progression in the Disney movie, there's not necessarily a progression in a Universal movie. I mean, Universal has made, didn't they make like Porkies, and I know they made Mallrats, like a lot of these like dirty teen movies, and there's not that same attachment families have to the intellectual property. Now, I think we want to be very careful in saying that just because you're supporting all people doesn't mean that that is anti-family at all. Like, I think we've been pretty clear over the years how we feel about Disney being more inclusive. We are fans of it. But when you see something coming from a company like Disney that has been around so long, I think there are people who attach the same values that might have been in a 1937 movie as being the same values as what's going to be in a 2023 or a 2024 movie, which is going to be completely different.
Yeah. And I think once again, it's just the perception of it in terms of the companies being on different playing fields. Like they are both great theme parks. I'm not going to sit and say that they aren't because they are. And Universal is doing some incredible things right now that I'm really looking forward to. But, I feel like I'm pretty plugged into theme parks in general. I could tell you who runs the Disney parks. I know that people who don't even really know Disney on the same level as I do know who runs the Disney parks. They can name the CEO. Ask them to do it for Universal. Heck, ask me to do it for Universal. I don't think I could. They're just not getting the same level of attention or being held to the same standard of things personally falling on their shoulders as Disney is, which is very interesting. And I feel like there's a whole lot of research that we could do just, teasing that apart. But I think to your point about what Disney does or what Universal does well is they just kind of don't entertain nonsense. Like they just don't talk about J.K. Rowling. They don't do it. They're building a whole new theme park with Harry Potter included. There's going to be a whole new Harry Potter land. And they haven't made any statement that's like, yes, we're building this land, but we don't agree with what J.K. Rowling stands for. Disney would have. So maybe there is something to be said for Universal just shutting up and refusing to speak on things. However, back to the inclusivity, certain people might feel a little better having statements like that come out to say, oh, okay, so you're doing this to capitalize on it, but you don't necessarily agree with it.
Well, one of the perception issues that Disney might have is something that I'm going to move into in a little bit here. Is Disney always had the perception of being the best at service. It was one of the things that Michael Eisner really pushed when he was CEO at Disney, which is funny. You just brought up, like, you never know those names with Universal, but Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, Bob Chapek, like these are names that just a lot of people know. And he really stressed having this attention to detail, this customer service. It's why when we had the conversation about Universal changing their disabilities pass, and we still absolutely hate the way Universal is moving, the direction they are moving with their disability pass. Nobody online in the theme park community, there was nobody who said what Universal is doing with the disabilities pass is a good idea. But they made the announcement, then they shut up about it, and then the issue just disappeared for them. And Disney, on the other hand, will do handsprings up and down to try to make sure that everybody who needs a disabilities pass gets a disabilities pass. And then they try to cut down on third party tour guides, quote unquote. And then people start to get worried about the disabilities pass. So there is an element of darned if you do, darned if you don't to Disney wanting to please everyone. It's like the line from Wayne's World. Led Zeppelin didn't write songs that everybody liked. They left that to the Bee Gees. Disney is trying to be the Bee Gees in this situation. And when you try to please everyone, especially in a politically charged time like right now, you're going to end up pleasing nobody.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And, again, it does make me wonder because, okay, obviously, we're two theme park fans talking about this. And I have to imagine if we're having these conversations, Disney executives have to be having these conversations because
I hope they're having these conversations because it doesn't feel like they are having them.
right, which is what really gets to me because, if we're sitting here pulling this apart and talking about it and analyzing it, if they're not, why? And if they are, what is pushing them to not change things? It's really interesting to me.
So here's another question, sort of bringing Universal back into the fold. Universal has never felt the need, or at least it doesn't feel like it, to be as big as Disney. They know that they can make their money. Yes, they're building Epic Universe and they're talking about Epic Universe as something that, a universe is bigger than a kingdom, or, all the fun that they have going at each other back and forth. But they have set themselves up in a situation where being the second option is very, very lucrative for them. So they don't have to please everybody. Is just the general size, not just of the theme parks, but of the Disney company and the Disney brand, has it gotten so big that it's hard to maneuver around these issues? Like if you think, the bigger your car, you're driving around in a little Nissan Sentra and you can make all the turns really sharply. And all of a sudden you're driving an Astro van and you can't make that right turn as quickly. Is Disney such a big entity that its sheer size is leading to some of these perception issues?
Yeah, I think so. And really funny when you started talking about the cars. In my head, I was forming my own analogy, and this is really going to show a nice little difference between us because I was going, it's like you're riding a horse versus a dragon. So you went with something nice and practical, and I went straight to dragons. But I do think it's a little bit of this untamable beast that they're trying to curtail all under one thing. Like they're trying to apply one strategy to all these different brands that are now under the overarching Disney brand. And, it's really hard to do that. We're seeing it even in terms of, Disney adapting and making changes, and now they've got a streaming service. And it's like, okay, that's great. But now it's causing problems for them in other areas because people aren't going to see their shows in the movie theater because they know it's going to be streaming 2 months later. So they're trying to apply this just like broad strokes. Everyone wants streaming. That's good. We're going to do that without taking time to like finesse and say, okay, even if we do this, maybe we have to adjust, timelines, or we have to adjust this or that. And it does seem to be like it's almost getting away from them a little bit.
And when we talk about the dragon that is Disney compared to the horse that is Universal, not that I think riding a horse seems like something that would be super easy either, but anyway. But as we talk about the dragon that is Disney and some of the perception issues, I think this is a good time to end this episode because I want to kick up the next episode with Disney and its size and its perception issues talking about Star Wars. If there
Oh,
is one area where Disney has just lost the ball, like had the narrative just absolutely stripped from them, it is with Star Wars. And they have managed the perception of that intellectual property probably worse than they have handled anything. The Don't Say Gay bill, Splash Mountain, that's not even close to how poorly they have managed the perception of Star Wars. So I think that is where we're going to pick things up next week because that is a good topic.
yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
Maz, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This has been episode 155 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Do you agree with the things Maz and I said about Disney's perception issues? If you are going to be respectful, and that is a big if, and keep in mind our desire to have everyone feel welcomed and included, I would love for you to drop your opinions in the comments on YouTube. Maz and I will return next week to talk about how these perception issues impact Star Wars and Marvel. That will be next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.